So just a very warm welcome from my side to everyone who's in the room. And today we have Nerina, who will be interviewing Rene van der Merwe and Esther Martins, just about research and some of their experiences with research. And the idea behind the informed sessions is really just to have an informal chat about research and what it is that makes research so very, very interesting. So without me going on any further, I'm going to hand over to Nerina.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Peter, and welcome to Esther and Rene, and thank you for letting me interview you. I'm just going to jump right into the first question, and Esther, if you don't mind, maybe going first, and then we'll go to Rene. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Thank you, Nerina. So I am Esther Martins. I'm Dean of the Built Environment Faculty here at Inscape Education Group. So a bit of my background. My background is in interior design. So did my undergrad and postgrad and with a master's in interior architecture with quite a bit of a focus on, I guess, contextually relevant interior design and considering what decoloniality and decolonization has to, or how it enacts within an interior design. And that's a bit about me and my background.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, Esther. And Rene?
So for me, I studied interior design at TUT, Tshwane University of Technology. And then I did my BTech and also my master's. And then I started supervising the BTech students. And then we moved to Cape Town. So I'm originally from Pretoria. I moved to Somerset West in Cape Town and started working for Inscape, where I began supervising the honors students. And now I'm the program manager of the Built Environment Faculty.
Cool, thank you, Rene. I think let's stick to you for now, and then we'll go to Esther with the next question. So when did you realize that research is vital? Was it this gradual realization, or did you have a light bulb moment?
I think for me it was a light bulb moment. I remember when I did my BTech, they introduced us to this thing called ProQuest. And I was like, what is this? Where have you been all my life? Do you want to tell me that I don't need to do all the research myself? There are people who have done it before. And that sort of opened a whole new chapter for me. And I got really into research, and I'm really passionate about research. Yes, I think it was like the light bulb moment for me, introduction to ProQuest.
I love that ProQuest was the light bulb moment. I also definitely love ProQuest. Very, very user friendly as well. And for you, Esther?
So I think for me it was a bit gradual. If I consider and think about undergrad, I think in my undergrad I didn't really fully understand or grapple with what research is, but in postgrad I think that's where the challenge kind of begins and the rubber hits the road, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's research, and you've been taught all of that stuff, but it now becomes so much more practical because also you're a bit more independent in postgrad, you're a bit more focused in what you're trying to research and what you're trying to delve into. And more being supervised rather than kind of being facilitated by a lecturer per se. Mm-hmm. So I think for me it was quite gradual, and the love is there. And I think, thinking back to my BTech or honors and masters, I think that love for it just kind of grew as the years went by.
That's awesome. I think supervision is such a big difference than being facilitated. It makes a massive difference. Mm-hmm. And then Esther, if you don't mind jumping into the next question for us, how do you use research capabilities and skills in what you do now? And can you provide an example for us, please?
Yeah, I think the one beauty about research is that the skill is transferable. So it doesn't just sit in that space of, I was researching decolonization and that's what I'll do for the rest of my life. But I think the skill and understanding of how research can be enacted or played out in different spaces or careers that you might take. So for me currently or maybe let me start when I was in industry. So after doing my master's, I went out to industry And I think research there played out in the sense that, you know, you do the client study, you do the context study, you consider the brand, you do that research. It may not be formalized into a document, but that document might be a presentation, you know, so that's how research might play out. Whereas now in my role as dean, it's more about the institutional knowledge and the feedback we receive from lecturers. So, you know, so for instance, recently we had a feedback session with lecturers, which gives you some kind of, what can I call it? Like, it's feedback, but it is, it's just like food to kind of continue on and consider and dissect about, okay, well, how can we make the program better? So I think research happens in that way. I think it happens formally sometimes, and it happens informally, in the sense that sometimes it may be a conversation that sparks something that sends you down a road, and sometimes it's formal. It's the internal moderations that we do. It's the national moderations. So that becomes part of the research. So right now for me, it's quite institutional, and then also in my postgrad studies as well. Currently, it becomes a bit more academic. So it plays out differently.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially you're comparing just how it was in industry and how you could see that research directly in the actual final design that you did. I feel like that's sometimes a bit more, you can see the fruits of the research, whereas in academia it takes a little bit longer before you see that. And for you, Rene?
So I think for me, how I use research in my day-to-day job would be with me as the developer for subjects that we are constantly reviewing and redeveloping. So I'm constantly researching, you know, the trends, what are we moving towards, what do we need to include, what are other institutions doing. Just to create the best experience for the students, for the lecturers, and to keep in line with Inscape's goals as a whole. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then, if you don't mind, also going with to the next question for us, what would your advice be to some of the students in the faculty of the built environment?
So I would say to students that they must just go for it. They must just do it. I know it feels a bit daunting, this whole aspect of research. And I know for me, when I was younger, I would always hear about these conferences and people presenting and see conferences happening at our university or see my lecturers going to present at conferences. And once I took the first leap and presented at my first conference, I actually saw that it wasn't that daunting. Everybody is just like me. And I actually really enjoyed it. And now it's one of my favorite things is to present at different conferences, meeting new people, sharing new ideas. So I would say to them is just do it.
I love that. I feel like very applicable even to me now, and I think most people in the design field. And then for you, Esther?
I think for me, as in life, I think research is always more fun when done in community. I think if you can get people on the road with you, if you're not sure about something, whether it's getting a mentor, whether it's doing research with somebody, whether it's just asking questions of somebody, I think to Rene's point, it can be quite daunting at the beginning, but if you're doing it with somebody, or if you're in a community of people, like she says, you know, you go into a conference and you're like, oh, there's this whole community of people who also kind of figuring out and rumbling with it. But yeah, my advice would be, you know, do it in community, and that could be collaborative within your own discipline. So as an interior designer with another interior designer, or student or academic, or it could be, you know, with a graphic design colleague, or BADMC, or a digital marketing student or colleague. You know, so don't kind of silo what research could be. And I think consider there's that very academic written research, but there's also practice-based research, which I think is also quite beautiful to consider, to think about, you know, that practice-based research and how that lives out. So don't be too, I think, overwhelmed by the term research and think, how will I ever do it? You're currently doing it, and I think it's that subtleties of, if I'm going on a trip or I'm going to a place I haven't been in Johannesburg, I will go on Google Maps and I will search and I'll be like, okay, what's happening? How do I get there? What's the best time? That's research. So that's how, research breaks down into the everyday life we do here and now. If you're buying something from Takealot, you go and you find it, you search and you add things to your wish list and then you go make a decision. That's research. And how you kind of take that and just ramp it up all the more into the academic space or into that practice space research, it just makes it less daunting if you realize that you're actually doing it in your everyday life anyway. I think that would be my advice.
I love that. Basically, it's foundation already that we're familiar with, and also just the community behind it. I know for me personally, just being able to hold your peers accountable when doing research helps me as well. That's awesome. Thank you, Esther. And in what sort of research practices should students be paying attention to right now, looking specifically at the built environment? Rene, if you would like to go.
I actually made a few notes. So I think aligning to us at Inscape as well, obviously in the forefront is sustainability. And then looking at incorporating local heritage and craftsmanship, so supporting local craftsmen and using local materials, I think is important. And then for us as well, we aligned our majors to include this, was the emphasis on social, community-centric design, with an emphasis on design for inclusivity. And then also close to my heart is adaptive reuse of buildings, and that sort of connects with the sustainability aspect of it all. And then lastly, another thing close to my heart is the technology integration. So with that, we're specifically looking at AI, but I mean, there's many types of technology that we can integrate. So I think those are the sort of research practices from my perspective that students could be looking at and looking into at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. And also just with the technology integration, I think just for the students to know what's currently being used in the built environment, like on the actual sites and so on as they're building, I think just knowing what they have to work with is very important as well.
Yes.
And for you, Esther?
Yeah, I think the technology and innovation for me is something that's really quite, it's not new per se. I mean, technology in itself is not new, it's just evolved. But the way it is just innovating and changing, and it's just exponential. So I think, considering how that impacts the broader design disciplines, us as a built environment faculty, we constantly have to be sort of have a finger on the pulse to really consider how do we integrate, how do we better prepare students to research within that, and then also to be able to be in practice and to kind of have that muscle going already, and to know that they also need to keep the finger on the pulse. I think the inclusive design for me is also really something that's exciting, and I think in that inclusivity, it's that social, it's the cultural, it's considering people with other abilities. So how do we design in a way that's considerate, that is human-centered, but it is inclusive. And that's always such a fine balance, because you can't design for all people all the time. But how do you design for the greater impact? How do you make sure that you're not disadvantaging anybody within how you design? So I think that for me, those two are quite key. And even as we consider technology, for instance, or innovation, if we think of AI, we think of integrating tech into, let's say, the built environment perspective. Are we being inclusive of people who are aging in place? Are we being inclusive of the elderly? Or are they being left behind? And we're integrating such technology that's just alienating them from their own space. So I think those two for me go quite hand in hand.
I love that. Thank you, Esther. I think let's stick to you, if you don't mind. Where do you think interior design is heading in South Africa currently? Esther.
Sure, what a question.
Yeah.
What a question. I think there's a bit more of a socially, culturally attuned and aware interior design that's happening. We are celebrating a bit more, or not a bit more, proudly. We're proudly celebrating what is happening contextually within South Africa, and I think broadly within Africa itself. And that for me is exciting, because I think we're not being stereotypical. We're not, when somebody says vernacular, we're not thinking these thatch roof houses or whatever it might be. We're actually challenging the norm. We're challenging how the West might view us, and we're telling the West who are we, how do we want to be viewed, what do we want to make, what are we celebrating. So it's and I think that shift for me is really quite exciting. And it's beautiful to think where we could head. I think of my little daughter is now going to be turning 3, and I imagine the world that she'll live in one day, and what interior design could look like and be like, and I think that keeps me honest, and that keeps me kind of making sure that what impact I have right now is positive, whether it's on a social, sustainable perspective. Yeah.
I love that. And for you, Rene?
So one of the themes for our current third year B-Day students in their final project is Imagined Futures. And it's sort of my favorite theme, and I love to see what sort of comes up every year when students choose that theme. The most amazing things, and I can just imagine all of these futures that they're imagining. So there's so many possibilities, but for me, I think experiential design, so creating experiences for people using spaces and people going to spaces. So I recently went to present at a conference in Falmouth in the UK. And one of my favorite things, I went back to London for a few days to do a bit of sightseeing, and one of my favorite things was actually doing shopping. Not that I could actually buy anything because of the exchange rate, that's so crazy. But just going to all of the different stores, the retail stores, the shops, and just seeing how they are incorporating this experience design within retail was just amazing for me to see. And I think there's so much that we can still achieve within that space.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I feel like you do start seeing that already in some of the newer spaces that's being designed and opening up across the country. And then just the final question, I think I'm going to let Rene go first with this one. Why would you say is conducting research important for our students? I think we did touch a little bit on it already.
Yes. So what I can add to that is I always tell my students that I don't think that they understand the impact that they can make. Like when they go out into the world and into the industry, they really have such a big role that they play in shaping these imagined futures and these futures that we're building and creating for our children and for generations to come. So I think how research would tie into that is just, as Esther also mentioned, the community, the collaboration, the sharing of ideas and building upon them.
Love that. Esther, and for you?
I think for me, in addition to, I guess, our previous responses, is that it's informed decision making. And I think for me that's quite key because, out of what base, out of what foundation, out of what framework, out of what action are you making that decision? So it becomes more about making informed decisions. So you've looked at reliable information, whether it's past, present, or future. You're making informed decisions about the materials you use. Are these materials recyclable? The supplier. So, for instance, let's take a material research. Let's say you, as a student, you might be doing you find your project or a second year project or first year project, and you're thinking, I want to use this product. The material supplier says it's sustainable, and you actually delve a bit deeper and you realize, actually it's not. So then you're able to make that informed decision and say, I'm not going to use X supplier, I'm going to use Z supplier because actually I've done the research. So for me, that becomes that you're using reliable information, and even with spatial layouts, for instance, if you're doing the research and you're actually walking around in the space, so that it could be physically, you're doing the research, you're walking around in the space, you're seeing where the sun comes in, you're seeing where the noise is, yes, you can look at, desktop studies, but there's something about being embodied in a space that's just different. So I think it really helps you to make better decisions if you're more informed, if you've done the research.
Yeah, and I think also from my little experience of teaching or lecturing, definitely those students who went above and beyond with the research that I've done, you can really see that in the actual projects and how they designed based on that research. Even with that restaurant brief for the second years now, those who actually went to restaurants, went into the back of house, they just had a better understanding. Yeah, so thank you. I think that was the last question from my side, so I'll just maybe give back the microphone back to Peter if there's anything else.
Just from my side, thanks once again to everyone who's involved. Thank you, Rene van der Merwe, thank you, Esther Martins, and thank you, Nerina, for interviewing our panelists today. Thank you so much, and just for sharing your enthusiasm and your interest in doing research. Wishing you guys a happy Friday.